Hello Internet, welcome back to our experimental Cataclysm series. If you're not familiar, this is the show where we talk about updates that have come to the experimental version of Cataclysm over the last couple of weeks. Just as a heads up, there are a couple things we need to talk about before we begin. Number one is on a technical note. You may notice I probably sound a little bit different than I normally do. That is because I'm trying something new with my audio as well as with my video editing. So it might not be perfect, but I'm willing to bet it probably sounds a lot better than it normally does, and really it's hard to make it any worse. Now, if only I could get my Twitch audio to sound like this, I'd probably be a lot better off. So that's the technical side of things, and then additionally, as a side note, there was no changelog for this week, which would have been the 19th, I think. I don't really know. No, 19th was yesterday, but it's this week. As of the time this goes up on the channel, there was no changelog. I believe the person is taking the person who does them is taking like a mental health break or something. Either way, feel better. Hopefully that goes well. But because there was no changelog, I went through the GitHub, which is something I don't often do these days because I find it very difficult and tedious to look through all the changes manually. So because of that, there may be some that I missed. There may be some that weren't quite in the time frame that they normally are. They might be too new to normally be covered for this episode, but we're just going to go with it anyway. And then, if it doesn't really matter, I think. So, yeah, and there's not a lot to cover this week, but let's just jump into it. So the first thing I wanted to mention from Urk, of course, we got an update to the Ultica tile set. Now, this was 8 days ago as of the time of this recording, and there was another update, I believe, last night. So it is being updated. I'm willing to bet that that's going to continue leading up to 0.F, so that at the time of the stable release, there will be a nice, more complete tile set available for all players. That would be my expectation, is that this will continually be updated. And yeah, if you haven't given Ultica a chance, I would recommend you give it a shot. I've been using it in my most recent Let's Play, which should be up on the channel, I believe, the same day that this video goes up. So if you've never really seen Ultica, I mean, there are screenshots here, but yeah, we're going to be switching to Ultica in my playthroughs. So yeah, I think it's a really good tile set. I think it needs some more work. There's a lot of tiles, mostly stuff on the ground that doesn't have a sprite. Like once you drop your item, let's say I was just doing something where I saw a bundle of planks don't have a sprite, which is really not a big deal at all. And I think that the world in general looks really great. I think the vehicles are looking really nice. I do think some of the vehicle parts still could do with a little bit more work. But I ultimately really, really like the vehicles in Ultica. And the other thing is the forests. I just think that they look so much better in the Ultica tile set because we have these nice big trees. I mean, they just look so nice. It's much more densely populated. It looks much more like what a forest in America does. If you play on the other tile sets, everything's one tile, and it really evokes that image of like a European forest where the trees are very widely spaced. There's a lot of room to navigate. America, at least where I live, tends to be very, very thick underbrush, lots of random sprouts of grass and trees, very closely packed trees in the forests around here. So I really like that this is a much more, in my opinion, appropriate for the setting of Cataclysm. But anyway, let's not ramble about it. Ultica's looking great. They're improving it all the time. And Urk's working really hard. The vehicle stuff just got a lot of work done, which may have led to broken tiles in other tile sets. If you've been playing with the other tile sets, you may have noticed that some of the doors and things, that's because they expanded, I believe, to my understanding, I haven't really looked into this, they expanded the number of parts so that you can attach more sprite work to them. It's not that the parts actually change, it's just that it's much more in-depth for tile set purposes. So that's led to some broken tiles in other tile sets. But regardless, Ultica got an update. It got another update yesterday, and I think it's looking great, and it's going to probably continue getting updated as we move towards F. Next, from Finor, I just wanted to point this out because I know we've talked about it before, but I like to give credit where it's due. There are still people working to audit all of the lengths and weights and all this stuff of items are getting constantly addressed. Since the length was added to the game, there's been tons and tons of items that need auditing. There are still people doing that work, and I just grabbed a random PR to kind of shout out this person. I saw Finor had done multiple of these type of PRs, so I just wanted to give them a shout out that they are working on that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's kind of that tedious work that nobody necessarily wants to do. People always want to work on big, really impressive things that everyone's going to see and think are great. But there's a lot of work like this. I get people all the time who say, oh, I want to contribute, but I don't know how. This kind of work is really good for people. I mean, I'm not saying Feinor can't do like complicated code work. I don't know this person at all. But for new players or new contributors, this kind of stuff is like your bread and butter, right? It's this kind of JSON work that isn't necessarily super technical. It's just doing the work, and it is a lot of work. So I respect people who take the time to do that because it frees up the devs to work on more important, significant code type stuff. So again, not bad mouthing this person. For all I know, they're the best coder in the world, and they're just choosing to do this, for supporting the project. But either way, I respect what you're doing. I appreciate your input. Thanks for that. Next from Jay, by the way, we got achievement completed pop-up. What this does is actually create a pop-up when you have completed your achievement. Now, I did play this very recently on a build with this change, and I did not notice that pop-up, which makes me think it might be off by default. But I like this a lot because achievements were a little bit not super obvious. I saw people on a pretty regular basis on Discord saying, oh my God, we have achievements, because these things would pop up in the log on the right-hand side of the screen, and they weren't super visible. And if you didn't know to look in the score menu, you might never know that there were achievements. So I really like having this actually pop up. I'm not sure where that setting is in the game. I suppose I should load up the game and have a look at that. And so here we have the setting. You can find this in your interface options in line 34. It's listed as pop-up window when achievement is completed. Oh, they spelled achievement. They spelled that wrong. And basically the way it is set by default is first. And what that means is that you will get this the very first time you complete the achievement, but once you've completed it, it will not pop up again in future games. You can set it to never pop up, and you can set it to always pop up. I probably will leave it set to always, I think, because you would always want to be alerted when you complete an achievement. It would be my opinion, even if you've already completed it before. So I really like that because it makes achievements a lot more visible and makes it more readily apparent to players who maybe don't know that that is something that exists in the game. Because I do think that achievements add a level of something. Cataclysm in general is a sandbox. Lacking direction usually means you get bored eventually. So having something to chase down like an achievement is generally pretty beneficial. So I'm glad to see that get a little bit more, become a little bit more visible for players who maybe didn't know it existed. Next, we got a small bug fix, basically from Q-Rocks, I'm going to say is your name. Basically, if there was a bottle on the floor, let's say, in fact, we encountered this in one of our Let's Plays on Twitch. I was trying to apply antiseptic. The bottle was on the ground, and when I tried to apply it, it gave me a message saying that I could not use spilt liquids. This is obviously a bug. Just because it's on the floor doesn't mean it's not in the bottle. And this bug fix, I assume, fixed that. So that's a really nice little bug fix. Normally, I don't cover bug fixes, but we did just experience this. So I thought this was a pretty quick turnaround because I saw some discussion about it, and then it pretty much immediately got fixed. So respect for the quick turnaround. Good job. Moving on. Next from Levian Fiend, we got two new professions, specifically the profession counterparts of the burner and hazmat zombies. So if you're not familiar, the burner is a soldier zombie that carries a flamethrower, or did when it was alive or whatever. And then a hazmat zombie, of course, you're probably familiar with. They're much more basic, and they're just dudes in hazmat outfits. And so what this does is add professions that reflect that. So previously there was nothing in the game that when it died would convert into that type of enemy. Does that make sense? So now you can start the game as basically a live version of the burner or hazmat zombie. I'm not sure what precisely they get, but it looks like the burner starts with some basic weapons training. Presumably this, of course, would be someone in the military, so it makes sense that they would have some combat training, basic military gear, gas mask, flamethrower, an M17, which apparently is a 9mm. I'm guessing that's a pistol, and then a mag for the pistol, and a combat knife, as well as the two-way radio. So pretty basic. Again, I think this is more of a flavor thing just because there was no like survivor counterpart to those zombies. And then we have the hazmat unit people as well. And they begin, of course, with a hazmat suit, medical gloves, some basic other stuff. And I believe both start with a full gas mask. So full gas mask for the burner, and looks like not a full gas mask, just a filter mask For the hazmat zombie, or the hazmat profession. So pretty interesting. Again, it's more of a role play thing, I think, than anything else, and just because, to give that counterpart. So I wanted to shout this out. I like when we get new professions and things. So yeah, thanks to LeVay and Fiend for doing that, and we'll move on to the next thing. Next, again, a relatively small change, but a pretty visible one, and one I'm pretty pleased to have added to the game. So we have Roy Beyrube. Sorry about your name. I can't speak people's names very well. And we get in the Eat menu, we will now see when an item is contained inside of a container, or is sealed inside of a container. And you probably have already noticed this. Previously, we would just get this information and it would say, let's say, oh, this thing is going to spoil in 50 seconds, right? But what we wouldn't know is that it's actually sealed inside of a container, so it's not actually going to spoil in 50 seconds. It would spoil in, this is a bad example because nothing goes in 50 seconds after being opened, but let's say we open something up and then it would have a 2-day timer instead of saying it actually has a 2-day timer. So now we actually get to see when things are sealed in our Eat menu, which is pretty great. This is definitely a quality of life thing. I've often looked at a big consume menu and not really known, okay, is this actually contained in something? Is it not? If I open it, am I opening up a can that I might not use before everything starts to spoil? So I just like having that sealed thing inside of it. It just makes more sense and it relays more information to the player, which I think is just dynamite. I almost always support adding more information for the player to view. Then just to show you as an example, I've loaded up my stream game, and here we have a multitude of basic food items in my base here, and you can see that many of them have this sealed tag over here in the corner. Really like this. It just makes it a little bit easier to know what you're eating and what you need to prioritize. Again, pretty visible, but ultimately a very small change. I just really like it. I enjoy having that information relayed to me, so wanted to shout that out. I personally will take a lot of use from that. I don't know how much you care about it, but I think it's a really great change. Next, also from Jay, by the way, we got an automatic sorting of body parts based on how they're connected together. We talked about this. I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but we talked about it in our Let's Play. Basically, a little while ago, Frizz did some work that had sorted our body parts, I guess, randomly. And it was displaying randomly both in the at menu as well as in the actual sidebar menu. And this just is a change made to make things display adjacent body parts next to each other so that it's just a little bit more reasonable. It's a little easier. Like, I don't know, it wasn't a huge deal to have them shuffled around, but you really did get used to thinking, okay, my head is the top one. Okay, my torso is the second one. And so, it's just that little bit of extra comfort that as you get used to it, you can do it at a glance without having to read the actual body part names. Not a huge change, but I was glad to see this get sorted out. I did not like the random element of what it was before. It just seemed like a jumble of body parts. And that was like a coincidence. It wasn't like they intentionally sought out to do this. It had just been sort of an adjacent change to something else that shifted the way body parts were sorted. And now that looks like that's been corrected to something more reasonable. So I just wanted to give that a shout out again because this is a pretty visible change, something that a lot of people noticed. And yeah. Next, from WAP Caplet, we have a bigger mini-map on all sidebar layouts. In fact, we should take a look at this in the game. So you may notice in the lower right-hand corner, so previously all we had was this small overmap display in our sidebar. I never really used this thing. I get that it's useful just at a quick glance to get an idea of what's around you, but I never really use it. And this adds a much larger overmap to the sidebar. Now with my current settings, it's quite small. If I collapse my mini map, we can actually see the whole thing. And this is just basically a map on your main screen. And I think that I don't like this personally. I don't think I'm going to play with it. You can toggle it off by using your sidebar options. That would be the right curly brace. So shift right closing bracket. And it will bring up the sidebar options. You go down to the overmap and you hit tab to toggle this off. This is something that I personally don't have a lot of use for. Like I said, I don't even use the one that already exists. But even though I don't think that I will be using it, I actually think this is really great because it prevents you from having to constantly open your map. You can just simply pop down your map occasionally. You can use Shift N to toggle your mini map. And instead of actually opening your map screen, a lot of times this is going to suffice. You don't necessarily need to open your full map. You can just pop this up and it gives you this huge display of what the overmap actually looks like around you. And again, it's not for me personally, but I totally get why that was added to the game. When this was implemented, it was on by default, and I disabled it in my game. However, it has been changed since then. It was only for a day or two it was set on by default. Now it's actually turned off by default. So, it exists. It's in the sidebar options, so you can toggle it as necessary. And yeah, I get why it was added. I think it's a good change, but for me personally, I'm a little bit hesitant to change. I'm a little bit set in my ways, so I don't think that I will be using it. But yeah, I like that change. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out as well. Next, from 10mm, we got quite a lot of 10mm guns added to the game. We're not going to go over all of what they are or anything like that. In fact, I guess they listed all of them here. And yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how common 10mm guns actually are in the real world. I know virtually nothing about handguns. And really the only 10mm I think I have ever really seen that I'm aware of was in the Fallout series. Most people are familiar with the 10mm pistol and submachine gun. I don't know how common they are in the real world. I have never seen, to my knowledge, a 10mm round in my life. So I don't know what they're common, like how frequently you're going to find these things, but they've been added to the game. And really, in my opinion on this kind of stuff is that if it exists in the real world and someone wants to add it, I think it's perfectly fine. So they might not be common, or for all I know, they might be the most common thing in the world, but they've added a bunch of 10mm guns, and I wanted to shout it out because I know a lot of you are really big into guns and probably will care a lot about this, so I wanted to give it a shout out. So thanks to 10mm, which is a great name, by the way, for adding 10mm guns to the game. But anyway, let's move on. And then finally, also kind of a small change. We talked in the previous episode about the changes to the surface that have been added to the game. And one of the earliest, most available recipes for that would be the fiber mat. The fiber mat functions as a surface quality 3 item. And so it seems like this will become the go-to for early game characters. And what this does, basically, very small change, it instead of requiring plant fiber as it did a week ago or 2 weeks ago or whatever, or 3 weeks, looks like I've been a little bit behind. Instead of requiring plant fiber, it actually was converted to use the sewing standard setup. And what that means is that instead of using plant fiber, it will use one of the standard sewing items. So I'll open up the game just to show you what that is. So here we can see it is a fiber mat. Now previously it required plant fiber exclusively, but it's been converted to using that sewing item. What that means is that you can use plant fiber, sinew, thread, or yarn to make this item, so it just makes this a little bit more easily obtainable in the early game. Someone told me you could get a lot of plant fiber by cutting grass, which is something I've never done, but it also seems to require specifically a machete or sickle or something, because apparently it's impossible to cut grass with anything other than that. But yeah, so it's not super attainable because obviously something like thread is much more easily obtained on day one. So yeah, pretty basic change, but it makes that early game recipe much more attainable and makes it so that people will be less frustrated by the surface system because they'll have easy access to one of the mats. And yeah, I think that's going to be a wrap on the episode. I think we talked about pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Not a lot of huge stuff this week. Again, things are going to trend downwards as we get closer and closer to 0.F, but we'll continue making shows as long as there's content and something exciting to talk about. And yeah, I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. For now, that's going to do it. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Keep washing those hands. Keep wearing those masks. Remember that we love you, and stay safe out there. And I'll see you in the next episode.